It is the 5th of December, and this day in Baptist history, our reading is the land of the unknown God. Our verse of Scripture comes from Acts chapter 17 and verse 23. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship. Him declare I unto you. The Baptist labor for the cause of Christ in Greece was undertaken by Reverend and Mrs. Horace T. Love and Reverend and Mrs. Cephas Pascoe, who sailed together for Greece on October 24, 1836. The ship arrived in Patras, Greece, on December 9. Soon after their arrival, the couples applied to the government for permission to begin distributing the Scriptures and to begin a ministry of teaching. Unfortunately, they were not met, as was Philip, with certain Greeks saying, Sir, we would see Jesus. The Greek Orthodox Church, though tenacious to her tenets, refused to provide the Scriptures in the language of the day. Members were allowed only an archaic version of the Scriptures that was unintelligible except to the most learned. Thus, when the Baptist missionaries provided Scriptures in the Greek language of that day, the Holy Synod manifested its opposition. The Greek Orthodox Patriarch issued a decree prohibiting the reading of the new Scriptures and commanded that copies should be burned wherever found. The decree served only to stir the curiosity of the Cretans and thereby aided the Baptist cause. By 1838, the missionaries had acquired the language, and it became necessary for them to determine the most beneficial location for establishing their ministries. In time, it was decided that Reverend and Mrs. Pascoe would move to Zante, Z-A-N-T-E, one of the Ionian islands, and that the Loves would remain at Patras. Despite the decree of the Greek Orthodox Patriarch, the missionaries worked seriously at the distribution of the Scriptures that were secured from the American Bible Society. In 1839, a widowed teacher, Mrs. Harriet Dixon, already knowing the language, joined in the ministry at Patras. Unfortunately, Reverend Pascoe's health failed because of the climate, and it was necessary for the couple to retire from the missionary service and return to the States. Mrs. Dixon taught in the school that the missionaries had opened in 1837, and the work at Patras seemed promising. However, Reverend Love's health began to fail, and for many months he had to suspend his labors. In 1840, it was determined that he could remain on the field only by moving to the island of Corfu, the capital of the Ionian Republic. The missionary was now assisted by a previously converted national who worked under the direction of Reverend Love. In August of 1840, Reverend Love baptized Apostolos, the first Greek convert of the Baptist ministry. The occasion arrested the attention of many citizens, for though the Greek Orthodox Church practiced immersion, the citizens had not witnessed the immersion of adults, for the Greek Orthodox Church practiced baby immersion. In 1841, Reverend and Mrs. R.F. Buell joined the Loves and Mrs. Dixon to labor in Greece, and they located in Malta. Trouble began to develop at the Christmas season of 1841. Reverend Buell, as his custom was in his walks through the town, had taken a bundle of tracts to distribute. It was the day preceding Christmas, the feast of Saint Speridion, S-P-E-R-I-D-I-O-N, the greatest religious festival of the Greek Orthodox year. As he approached the church, Reverend Buell freely distributed gospel literature, and there was seemingly an immediate negative reaction. An irate mob began to berate the missionary, and then they began to threaten him. He retreated to his home, but the mob was in fast pursuit. The rioting crowd broke into the house and destroyed all the Bibles and Christian literature that they could find. Indeed, the Buells had to be removed by an officer from the British garrison, who at the head of his troops led them to safety. Upon investigation, it was discovered that the angry mob had been told that Reverend Buell was distributing literature in opposition to the revered Saint Speridion. After a careful investigation, the missionary was exonerated by the Lord High Commissioner, but the spirit of hostility made the missionary labor very difficult. Fortunately, information of the situation with Reverend Buell was not transmitted to the people at Patras, and both that work and Reverend Love's ministry seemed to be prospering. Apostolos had been trained, and he proved himself a very useful co-laborer. He was faithful in his preaching, and in time several who attended his preaching gave evidence of conversion. Two men in particular, John and Kyriacus, who had been faithful for a lengthy period, requested believers' immersion. The two were baptized by Reverend Love on December 4th, 1842. However, on December 5th, Apostolos, John, and Kyriacus were attacked by some rabble who screamed, "Away with the Antichrist!" On the following day, the mob gathered near the home of Apostolos and threatened him with violence. Apostolos was accused by the mob of turning the people into Americans and breaking down their religion. The baptism was the last missionary service that Reverend Love was able to perform, for his health broke completely and he had to return to the States. Though other missionaries had been sent by the American Baptist Missionary Union, it was apparent to Reverend Buell that the mission was ill-fated. He recommended the discontinuance of the mission in 1850. In 1851, opposition sprang up in Zante, and a Greek assistant was thrown into prison. In summation, Edmund F. Merriam encapsulated the Grecian situation well when he wrote, and I quote, "It seems to be apparent that while the Greeks are of high intelligence and have great interest in religious subjects, they are not open to the influence of religious truth which enable them to endure separation from their own people and church for the sake of a purer gospel and a more living faith." End of quote. To God be the glory.